Paul and Kathy's story began on a warm summer afternoon, beneath the golden hues of a setting sun. They met at a friendly gathering, a chance encounter that would shape the course of their lives. Paul, with his quiet yet sincere demeanor, was instantly captivated by Kathy's elegance and the way she spoke, articulate, poised, and effortlessly charming. Kathy, on the other hand, found warmth in Paul's honest simplicity, his gentle eyes, and his unwavering kindness. Their connection was immediate, their love swift and intoxicating. In the early years of their marriage, their days were filled with laughter, shared dreams, and unwavering support for each other. Kathy's thriving career and Paul's stable position as a technical sales manager provided them with a strong foundation. They saved meticulously, dreaming of a grand home where they would build their future together. The love they shared seemed unbreakable, a bond that nothing could tarnish. But love, as Paul would soon learn, is sometimes not enough. As time passed, cracks began to appear in the picture-perfect life they had built. By the third year of their marriage, Kathy's work commitments had grown heavier. Longer hours at the office, endless meetings, frequent business trips. Paul noticed the shift, the way her presence at home became more of an absence. At first, he tried to silence the gnawing doubts that crept into his mind. He wanted to be the supportive husband, the man who stood by his wife's ambitions. But deep inside, something felt terribly off. Disagreements started to surface, small at first, then more frequent. Kathy would come home late, sometimes exhausted, other times unusually distant. Paul tried to reason with himself. She was simply busy, her career was demanding, but a voice within him whispered otherwise. He pushed those thoughts aside, refusing to acknowledge the storm that was brewing. And then one evening everything changed. While helping Kathy unload groceries from her car, Paul's eyes caught a glint of something tucked beneath the passenger seat. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against delicate fabric. A pink bra. A brand he recognized, one of Kathy's favorites. Yet something about its placement felt wrong, hidden in the shadows of her car. His heart pounded against his ribs, his breath caught in his throat. The rational part of his mind scrambled for explanations, but the unease in his gut told him the truth. That night, as Kathy moved around their home, oblivious to the turmoil in Paul's heart, he made a silent decision. He would not act on impulse. Instead, he would seek clarity. If his suspicions were unfounded, he would find peace. But if they were true, he needed to know. The following evening, Paul orchestrated a romantic dinner, candles flickering, the table set with care, a bottle of Kathy's favorite wine waiting. He wanted to remind her of what they had, of the love they once shared. But when she walked through the door, she barely glanced at the setting before uttering the words that sealed Paul's fate. "I have to go to a meeting with my colleagues," she said, her voice indifferent. And then she was gone. Something inside Paul snapped. While Kathy was in the shower the next night, he slipped his phone into her car, the tracking app silently activated. He told himself he needed proof, not for revenge, but for closure. That evening he followed her. Parked across the street from a dimly lit bar, Paul watched as Kathy stepped out of her car, her movements poised yet eager. She disappeared inside and the hours stretched painfully. Then at last she emerged. But she wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, close, too close. Paul's fingers clenched around the steering wheel, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, as if in slow motion, he saw it. The man turned, his hand resting on Kathy's waist, and kissed her. The world around Paul crumbled. His heart pounded with an unbearable weight as he followed them at a distance. Their car stopped in front of a hotel, and without hesitation they entered, hand in hand. There was no room left for doubt. Sitting alone in his car, Paul felt himself unravel. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief, all twisted together in a storm that threatened to consume him. The woman he had loved so deeply, the future they had planned, the trust he had built, shattered in an instant. He imagined storming inside, demanding answers, breaking down the facade she had so carefully maintained. But deep down he knew the truth. No confrontation would change what had already been lost. When he returned home that night, the house felt eerily unfamiliar, as if it no longer belonged to him. The walls, once filled with love and laughter, now stood as silent witnesses to his pain. And Kathy? She acted as though nothing had happened, speaking to him in the same tone, carrying on with her routines, oblivious, or uncaring, of the agony she had inflicted. Paul wanted to scream, to throw the truth in her face, to make her feel even a fraction of the torment coursing through his veins. But as he watched her, he realized something. Kathy had never truly respected him. The woman he had cherished had been living a separate life, weaving lies with practiced ease. He couldn't stay. Over the next few days while Kathy was at work, Paul quietly gathered his belongings. Bit by bit he packed his clothes, his personal items, his laptop. He made no noise, left no trace of his preparations. Each time he folded a shirt or placed an item into his bag, he reminded himself, this was necessary. He could not be a prisoner in his own life. Kathy's face lingered in his mind, the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who had once looked at him with tenderness. Had it all been a lie? Or had she simply changed, leaving him behind without a second thought? On the final night, Paul stood at the doorway for a moment, one last glance at the life he was leaving behind. The man who had once lived here no longer existed. Without a word, without a confrontation, he stepped outside, closed the door behind him, and disappeared into the night. Behind the mask of the woman he had once adored lay a truth that shattered Paul's heart. Kathy, the person he had trusted with every fiber of his being, had torn through the foundation of their love as if it meant nothing. The realization was both painful and liberating. In that moment, Paul's resolve solidified. There was no turning back. In the midst of his grief, an unexpected friendship took root. One evening, lost in thought at a dimly lit bar, Paul met a man named Ree. There was something about Paul's demeanor, an emptiness in his eyes, the weight of something unspoken, that caught Ree's attention. With the kind of blunt honesty only a stranger can offer, Ree leaned over and said, "You look like a man who needs to get away." At first, Paul hesitated, but then Ree extended an offer. "I have a trailer on my property. It's nothing fancy, but if you need a place to clear your head, it's yours." The idea seemed absurd at first, yet the more Paul thought about it, the more it felt like his only escape. A plan began to take shape when Kathy casually mentioned she'd be leaving for a work trip. The irony wasn't lost on Paul. Another trip, another excuse. Only this time he wouldn't be waiting when she returned. As soon as Kathy left, Paul moved with quiet efficiency. Every item he packed felt like shedding a layer of his old self. The last thing he did before walking out was leave a note on the kitchen table. Just a few words, but enough to make his message clear. "I hope it was all worth it." Beside it, he placed his wedding ring, a final symbol of the life he was leaving behind. Then, without a glance back, he stepped out the door and into the unknown. The moment he hit the open road, a sense of weightlessness filled his chest. The past, the betrayal, the suffocating routine of a life built on lies, it all began to fade into the distance. The air felt cleaner, the mountains ahead vast and untamed. For the first time in years, Paul felt free. When he arrived at Ree's property, he was surprised by the warmth of the small trailer. It was simple, rustic, but it carried none of the ghosts of his past. Here, under the endless sky, he could start anew. The idea of rebuilding his life from scratch was daunting, but it was his choice now, no longer dictated by the deceit of another. But even as he embraced this newfound freedom, questions gnawed at the back of his mind. Why had Kathy done it? Had their marriage ever been real to her, or had he been nothing more than a supporting character in her story? He knew he would never get the answers he sought, but what mattered was that he no longer needed them. On his first night in the mountains, Paul walked for hours beneath the vast expanse of stars. The cool breeze whispered against his skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he listened to the rhythm of his own heartbeat. It was still there, steady, strong, alive. The days passed in quiet solitude. Mornings were filled with crisp mountain air, and nights were spent by the campfire, staring into the flames, letting the past burn away with the flickering embers. Slowly, the anger inside him dulled, replaced by something softer, something that felt almost like peace. Then, out of nowhere, Kathy's name lit up his phone screen. The message was brief, yet heavy with desperation. "I need to explain everything to you. I regret betraying you. Please let's talk just once." Paul's fingers hovered over the screen. A flicker of hesitation pulsed through him, but in the end, he agreed to meet her. Not because he needed closure, he had already made his peace, but because he wanted to hear what she had to say. A week later, they met at a small cafe, far from the city they had once called home. The moment Kathy saw him, tears welled in her eyes. She looked different, hollow, as if the weight of her choices had finally settled on her shoulders. Paul, however, felt nothing. For a long moment, she struggled for words. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she admitted. "But there's something you need to know." She took a deep breath before continuing. "It started as a mistake. The pressure at work, the long hours. I felt lost, broken. And in a moment of weakness, I strayed." She wiped her eyes, her voice cracking. "But after losing you, I realized that nothing else mattered. That man, he meant nothing. You were everything, Paul. I would give anything to undo it. Paul listened, his expression unreadable. He had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed every possible response. But standing before her now, watching her crumble, he felt only detachment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold but unwavering. "Kathy, there's nothing you can say to bring us back. The choices you made led me down a path I can't return from. You destroyed our marriage, our trust. And I can't spend another moment of my life looking back." Tears streamed down Kathy's face, but Paul felt no satisfaction in her pain. He had no desire for revenge, no need for validation. The only thing that mattered was that he was finally free. After that day he ignored her messages. With each one that went unanswered, Kathy faded further into the past until, eventually, there was nothing left of her in his world. Paul embraced his new life with open arms. With Ree's support he made the small trailer feel more like home. He found companionship in unexpected places, built friendships with people who knew nothing of his past. Then one morning fate intervened in the most unassuming way. While on a jog he noticed a woman struggling with a flat bike tire. Without hesitation he stopped to help. She laughed, calling him a mountain man as she watched him work, her teasing tone light and playful. There was something refreshing about her presence, something that made him forget the past entirely. As days turned into weeks, their paths continued to cross. She made him laugh, really laugh, something he hadn't done in what felt like a lifetime. And slowly, without him realizing it, she showed him that love, real love, was still possible. Paul had once thought that Kathy's betrayal had stolen his future. But now, standing under the open sky, his heart lighter than it had been in years, he realized the truth. The future had been waiting for him all along. He had just needed the courage to walk toward it.